High heat and humidity is extremely dangerous. Once we lose our ability to evaporate sweat, once the heart is working very hard to pump blood flow to the skin, both of which will help to dissipate that heat, it puts a tremendous strain on the physiology of the body. My name is Dr. Larry Kenney. I am a professor of physiology and kinesiology at Penn State and the Marie Noll Chair in human performance. One of the reasons that older individuals are most at risk is because they sweat less on an average basis, although there's some flexibility there in terms of increasing their ability to sweat by staying very fit and active. Their hearts are more vulnerable in terms of the aging left ventricle. And so, again, it's mostly people over the age of 65. Within that age cohort, older women are more vulnerable than older men. Humans have a great ability to tolerate very high heat, provided three things happen. One, we can sweat enough. Number two, that sweat can evaporate. And number three, we don't touch extremely hot surfaces. Sweating is only of benefit in terms of regulating our body temperature if that sweat evaporates. If the sweat on the skin doesn't evaporate and just drips off or stays on the skin or in the clothing, then it really just represents a wasteful loss of body fluid and causes dehydration. It's the sweat that we can't see, the sweat that evaporates into the air, that cools the skin and cools the body. And so the problem with high humidity is less evaporation for the same amount of sweat. The problem with defining a single number, which is what most people want to hear, is that it is the combination of temperature and humidity. So a 100-degree day in Arizona, when the humidity might be 18%, is very different than a 100-degree day in Florida, where the humidity may be 80%. One way we look at that is by just creating a nice graph of temperature and humidity and drawing that limit line. And anything below that limit line in terms of temperature and humidity is relatively safe. Things above that limit line are relatively unsafe. Wet bulb temperature takes into account both temperature and humidity. And the way you measure that is you take a regular thermometer and you put a cotton wick on the bulb of the thermometer and keep that wick wet. And as some of that moisture evaporates from the cotton wick, it cools that thermometer. And so it reflects both the influences of air temperature and humidity. So when we look at that number for younger individuals, that number is about 31 degrees centigrade, which is about 89 degrees Fahrenheit. Now that sounds low to most people, but remember that would be 89 degrees Fahrenheit at 100% humidity. In developed countries where air conditioning is common, that's clearly the number one intervention strategy, to either stay in your air-conditioned home or move to somewhere where there is air conditioning. So for example, an elderly individual who lives in a home without air conditioning can go to the local library, the shopping mall, the supermarket, someplace where there is air conditioning. It makes sense to most people that you turn on your electric fan and it blows air over you and you cool the body. And that's true, but not in all environments. Once you get to high temperatures, especially with low humidities, you start to blow warm air over the body, which can either be ineffective or counterproductive and cause core temperature to rise. One intervention is to spray water on the clothing and on the skin and use an electric fan, because that does benefit in terms of evaporation. For athletes, for recreational exercisers, and for all people, slow, gradual acclimation to the heat is extremely important. And so it's just a matter of public awareness of the problem, good education in terms of making sure people know how to combat that heat, and then keeping an eye on vulnerable populations. So if you have an elderly neighbor, for example, make sure somebody's looking in on them. So this is temperature in centigrade and relative upper limits of what we call livability. So these temperatures, not that bad for most individuals, but if it were 7, and so much fewer combinations of temperature and humidity,